not? Oh, good. I think I'll hunker down a little bit. So for those of you who have joined us online, thank you very kindly. Also, we have one attendant here in the the Kingman City Council chambers. And so I'd like to thank you for your participation in our first public meeting that's part of our environmental assessment process for the land release of additional land at the airport for development for non-aeronautical purposes. We're really excited that you have joined us, and we're excited actually for this step in the process. We do these public meetings for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we have a duty to inform, and also the public has an absolute need to know about what's going on at the airport, especially through this process. But the other thing is we invite your comments in the process because we value community input. We also realize that as the people who are involved in doing this on a essentially day-to-day basis, when you're down here with your eyes looking at the work, sometimes you don't see the bigger picture. So we're excited for the opportunity for all of you to present to us today what your thoughts are on the process. And with that, I'll introduce you to some folks. Here with me in the council chambers, we have Matt Quick from Kaufman and Associates is over there. We also have Judy, Krause, thank you. Judy Krause, also from Kaufman and Associates, who are helping us with the process. And we also have Becky Fossen here as one of our attendants for the from the Kingman Chamber of Commerce, and Bennett Bratley, who works with the Economic Development and Airport Group on developing property. And then online we have Mr. Corey Lewis, who is also one of the consultant team assisting us with the process. So at this time, I'd be happy to turn it over to him so that he can provide kind of an overview of what we're doing here today.
Great, thank you, Joe. I just want to pause and just make sure that everybody can hear me okay.
Loud and clear. Okay,
great, thanks. So, as Joe mentioned, the City of Kingman is undertaking a land release process for airport land. And that includes an environmental assessment. So the overarching process is the land release. One of those components is the environmental assessment piece. So that's what we're really focusing on now, because we need to complete it before we can submit the land release for review and approval by FAA. So some quick background information on the airport. So it was built in 1941, 4,000 acres on the north side of Kingman to support World War II efforts. Then it was later transferred to Mojave County as part of the War Surplus Act in 1944, and became the public airport in the area. Later, kind of seeing a need for industrial development, there was a release process similar to what we're undertaking now. This was in 1979. So that was a release of 1,100 acres. So this is over on the west side of the airport. And that was that land was made available for industrial development. And if you drive around out at the airport, you can see a lot of that in action right now. So then in 1992, the airport was transferred to the City of Kingman. So that's so of that 4,000 acres, 1,100 was industrial development. There's 2,900 that is the airport now. And then kind of moving forward to today, the City of Kingman recently completed an airport master plan, which was, actually that's incorrect. It was in January 2021, it was approved. So when we're talking about release, all the land at the airport is federally obligated. So that means that FAA has a say in what happens on that land, but there is an outlined process for releasing the land. So in going through that in the master plan, this is a well-timed process, because coming out of the master plan, we need to identify lands that are not needed for future aviation purposes. And then once the land is released, it can be sold or leased. with the caveat that revenues from that sale or lease must be used to support the airport. So as I mentioned, January 2021, the airport master plan was approved by City Council, and one of the key outputs of that master plan was the master plan development concept, which is shown here. This just kind of gives the overall, basically, if we take a line and kind of encompass all that, that's the 4,000 acres. Over on the east side, or the west side here, is the industrial park. And then all of this area here is the primary part of the airport. So there's approximately 200 acres left for development up in the industrial park. And to the master plan, the kind of key parts of the master plan that were identified in the development concept are runway extension, additional pavement for aircraft parking, and several different types of hangar development. Additionally, along with that, there's approximately 400 acres, that's all this yellow area, that is identified as aviation development reserve. So as we're thinking about the remaining acreage, this 2,900 acres, certain parts of it are needed for aviation development. So we've got those identified in these different colors here. Hangars being yellow and additional pavement being blue and red. And then on top of that, we have another 400 acres of aviation development reserve. So that's all these yellow areas. So when we're asking the question, FAA is asking the question, is this land to be released needed for future aviation development? I think it's pretty unequivocal that there's a lot of land out here that is not needed. And kind of going back to previous master plans in 1992 and 2006, there was no aviation development identified in this larger area out here. So this acreage in the light green, kind of sage color, is over 1,800 acres. It's 1,813 acres to be specific. So that's the area that we're talking about when we're talking about land release. As I mentioned, we're going through an environmental assessment process. So we're at the front end of that process. We go through this, and this is outlined by FAA how this process is conducted. So that we'll go through the preliminary analysis, identify the proposed action, then the purpose and need, and ultimately we'll get to a document that is submitted to FAA for review, and then along the way, the public will have input. As I mentioned before, the EA, environmental assessment, is part of a larger land release process that needs to be completed before the land release is submitted to FAA for review, and then ultimately gets published in the Federal Register. So the EA process can take up to 12 months. Our beginning date was October 2020. We anticipate submitting the document to FAA later this spring, and anticipate moving things along so that we have the process completed before the full 1 year. So when we're talking about the EA and what we're looking at, FAA defines several different categories, environmental resource categories that we need to look at. Specifically, some of these don't apply in Kingman, coastal resources and farmlands and some of those things, and related to this project. But we are, as part of this project, undertaking a biological survey, and we've had a cultural resources survey conducted, and also looking at for hazardous materials. So looking kind of at the history and the previous use of the released area. Now we do know that, and I think it's, in the past when I've visited the airport, there's some great pictures of all the aircraft that were stored out in this area where we're talking about releasing land. So that'll be part of the discussion about the potential for hazardous materials out in that area. And so we'll take those studies and incorporate them into the main document, and then submit that to FAA for review. So here's a kind of a clean look at the release area. As I mentioned before, the release would allow the city to either sell or lease land, and with the understanding that these red areas, which are approach areas, land within those two areas, here and here, would only be allowed for lease, so that the city could exercise greater land use control over what happens in those areas, really with the intent to protect those approaches. In general, so as I mentioned, it's a 1,800 acre area, 1,813 acres. And for reference, this southern boundary aligns with Gordon Drive. So if that provides a little bit of reference for people. So what's going to happen in the release area? We don't know. It would be developed over time in response to development proposals. We've put together a conceptual land use plan, which we have here. It has an initial road network. It has a spot for where a rail spur coming off the BNSF line could be built to serve some of these parcels. And what we're showing here is a kind of a range of size of parcels from 4 to 120 acres. Obviously, if the city could respond to developers and say, if a developer were looking for a larger parcel, some of these parcels could be consolidated and to be a development site. So that's the overview. So kind of where we go next is as I mentioned, we proceed through the environmental assessment process, and then the document goes to city staff for review, and then we do some additional coordination with the FAA, and then there would be a time later in the summer of 2021 for additional public comment on the draft document. So with that overview, I think we can open it up for questions. I think Lisa provided in the chat that people could unmute and ask questions. And then I think there's also an option for people in person to ask questions as well.
Thank you, Corey. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. So as I mentioned, we're excited about the opportunity to get some input from the public. So Elisa Lewis, who's our administrative coordinator at the airport, has actually put our Zoom meeting together, and she has the ability to open up comment lines for those that are participating in the Zoom arena. And so I would suggest that if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand or so we can unmute you. I also want to thank Corey for his overview of the process. It's a complicated and rather long process, but he and the team who we're working with are doing a great job on that. We're hopeful that we actually are able to complete this. I don't know if Corey mentioned it. Right now our schedule is that the environmental assessment portion is completed sometime in the fall. That's what's currently been scheduled. We're hoping to do a little better than that on time, but the time will tell, and the process will also tell. So, Lisa, do you have anybody queued up?
Joe, at this time, I don't see any questions pending.
Okay. Becky, anything you'd like to share? Okay, good. Well, then we'll be here. Should anybody have a desire to speak or have any questions, we're happy to answer them. Stay with us right along. Yeah. was here 2 years ago for 6 months. I also stayed in the same hotel, Best Western out in Miami. And since I've been back here since October, I've stayed in the same room every night. It's like home. So, I would assume. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I come up usually on, I'm here usually on either Monday, Tuesdays, and come back either Thursday, Fridays. It depends on the demands of the meetings that are scheduled that week. And if you don't want to do that, you can also fill out a comment sheet with you. And I do think we'll get some additional, we're sort of approaching this in kind of an open house format. I mean, we wanted to do an opening and an introduction, and we'll probably may do that again if we have other people coming and going throughout the process. But it's really just about people to be able to see the exhibits, see what we're in the process of, and then be able to ask any questions. So it's kind of more of an open house than a formal presentation, even though we had kind of a formal presentation to start with.
Is actually in a different location now. And when they moved to the new industrial park, is that what they're talking about, this area?
This area, yes. Yeah. And, I don't know, of the 1,100 acres that were leased before, we're almost completely built out, although there's still some parcels. But when was that released?
Let's say 79.
79, okay.
Yeah.
So it's been close to 40 years to absorb it all. So one would think that it would be sort of in the 40 to 50 year range on the new. Also.
Yeah. We actually immediately developed.
Yes, I would agree. Yeah, and there's other probably external factors that, as we know, there are things that cause people to move from one location and work and develop in another location. Of course, we've got sunshine. We had a great talk earlier today. Catch up.
Corey, are you seeing that question that's being posed?
Yes, I was just gonna to chime in and just, I guess I could just answer the question to the group. So we've received a question, and I think there's actually a few people that joined maybe mid-presentation. So I can kind of back up and discuss this. But the question is Andy Devine going to be the main entrance? So Andy Devine being here, and the primary entrance to the airport is through off Andy Devine down Mojave Airport Drive. So separate from this process, there is also a parkway here that connects down to the interstate. So there will be two entrances, kind of with the future thought that the main entrance to the this 1,800 acre area would be from the south, just for traffic flow purposes. Given that these are potentially larger industrial developments, that any kind of traffic off the interstate would come from the south and then up through this parkway. And then with the secondary entrance to through the existing industrial park.
Yeah, and Corey, I'd also like to comment, if you'd bring up the slide that shows the master plan approved development.
Yes, I will do that. Back up here.
Right now, when we just completed our master planning process and have an approved master plan that was just approved final approved in January, and you plan for airport development on a 20-year planning horizon. And usually you're updating that master plan before that 20 years is up. In our case, it was probably 12 to 14 years since we've done the last one. But if you'll notice on the master plan development, all of the currently planned development over the next 20-year planning horizon is all continued to be developed on the existing side of the airport that we are on right now. And so that's where we foresee continuing the development, and then therefore probably the entrance to the airport through Andy Devine Route 66 and Mojave Airport Drive makes the most sense. This area that's in yellow is for future development. And we've actually reserved a spot over there for future terminal area development. Right now we have existing land in and around the terminal that we can expand that as necessary to meet the aeronautical demand and the forecasted demand in the master plan. But we actually have identified areas on the other side of the field in that yellow area where we would potentially develop into the future. If we were to move the terminal area over there at some point in the future, then of course it would make more sense probably to enter from the new area, the new development area, the new main entrance road in the parkway area that is going to come in from the new interchange out around Rattlesnake. So I hope between Corey and I, we've adequately answered your question.
Drew, if you have any more questions, you're unmuted, or you can mute yourself again if you like.
Yes, I was just wondering, is there any roads coming off the 40 that are going to angle across there, like from Blake Road or coming down from the south on 40, or I guess it would be west?
Connecting.
So as part of the city's development plan, as you're aware, there's plans to develop 2 new interchanges in what's considered the East Bench development of the Kingman metropolitan area, the Kingman city. And those 2 interchanges, one will be where the medical center is now, and the other one will be a little bit further out at Rattlesnake. The city has plans to, within the next 5 years, develop, and starting with the Rattlesnake area, to develop those interchanges and start making those connections from the interstate into the East Bench area, which will include the airport area. So in the future, those that are coming to the airport from I-40, it will probably be a more direct shot to get off at one of those new interchanges, probably the Rattlesnake interchange, to actually get access to the airport, as opposed to going all the way down to Andy Devine and then coming out that way. So that's the proposed access area. As I said, and as we were talking about, the original industrial park area was released in 1979, and now it's almost completely built out. What I mean by that, by built out, you can see there are vacant parcels within it. However, there are very few parcels that are still remain for sale by the airport. We still have some. So that took about 50 years. We assume that the next release will also take, a number of years to fully absorb and develop. And so, as those, as the released area potentially does develop, then of course new access ways will be identified. But to the short answer to the question is, within the next few years, there is an expectation that new interchange will be developed, and that new roads accessing the airport will begin to be developed as well. Hope that answered your question. Happy to provide any additional information that you might desire.
So I was informed that my motions with my cursor earlier weren't showing up on the screen. So this, I was motioning to this parkway, and that is the alignment that would ultimately connect down to the Rattlesnake interchange. So if you're able to see that.
Thank you for your support. We're all distanced out in here.
I know we had some people on the Zoom that joined maybe mid-presentation. If there's a certain slide that you'd like me to go back to, or if you want me to.
Maybe even.
I can rewind until we say yes.
Yeah, and just kind of doing a quick overview of the slides that we have in the process.
Okay.
And then we can fill in any blanks that might be necessary.
Yeah, so.
But let me start off by just, those that have joined us late, I do welcome you to our first public outreach meeting for the land release process, and we thank you for joining us, and we also welcome your feedback. And so Corey will provide you a little bit of an overview of what the process is, and also what the plans are for the future.
Okay, so as we've been discussing, the airport was originally a 4,000-acre property that was developed by the U.S. government to support World War II efforts, and it was transferred to Mojave County in 1994 as part of the War Surplus Property Act. So that transferred those assets over to local communities, and there are communities throughout the United States that have airports that were originally developed during World War II. As Joe mentioned, there's an 1,100-acre industrial park on the west side. It was originally part of this 4,000 acres. So what remains is a 2,900-acre property that was transferred to the city of Kingman, and then the recently completed master plan, which is January 2021, going to identify this development. And when we're talking about land release, the big question is whether or not this land is needed for future aviation development. As Joe mentioned, the near-term development at the airport includes the runway extension and all this development on the west side of the airport. Additionally, there's approximately 400 acres that is reserved for future aviation development. So when we're asking that question, whether or not it's needed, we have reserved what we need, and we know, would be good facilities for the airport. But then there's a remaining 400 acres that could be developed in the future, along the lines of what Joe was talking about, the terminal development and kind of any other ancillary accessory development that would happen along with the terminal. Where we're talking about release, so this land is all federally obligated, and FAA has outlined a process for releasing the land. So that's this environmental assessment is one step in that process. As I mentioned, the land needs to be not needed for future aviation purposes. And then once the land is released, it can be sold or leased, and with the caveat that those revenues from those land transfers or lease would be used to support the airport. So we're, as I mentioned, we're in an environmental assessment process. Right now we're soliciting comments on the project, and ultimately all of this information will get put into what's called an environmental assessment. That document will be submitted to FAA by the City of Kingman, and then with some coordination with FAA, the document will be released to the public for review and comment. And then ultimately, once that's finalized, that gets packaged along with a request for release, and then a Federal Register notice is published. Regarding the schedule, environmental assessments can take up to a year. We began in October. We're endeavoring to submit the document to the FAA later this spring, and hopefully we'll move along and complete the process prior to that year deadline. We'll be looking in the document at several different resource categories. Specifically, we have biological studies, or a biological study has been prepared. We've also looked at the historical, archaeological resources, potential for those out in the area, and then also looking at hazardous materials, specifically related to the land's previous use as the World War II era, and then subsequent to the war. If you've seen these pretty fascinating pictures of that whole land south of the airport, that it's covered in aircraft that were ultimately disassembled there at the airport. So here's just a general view of the 1,813 acre property. It's largely south of the airport. The southern edge of this release area aligns with Gordon Drive for reference. And so it's quite a large area. If you've been out to the airport and been through there, the industrial park, as we've mentioned, is 1,100 acres, and what we're talking about is a 1,800 acre area that stretches out to the south and wraps around up to the east. So quite a large amount of land available. Conceptually, what may happen on the property, would be ultimately it would be targeted toward industrial development. What we're showing here is a conceptual plan. This depicts lots that are between 4 acres and 120 acres. So really flexible type of development to respond to developers' requests. There's as I mentioned, a road network, and then a few. We've identified some existing washes that would that are on the property, and then also, as we mentioned and discussed before, the proposed parkway alignment through the property. This is just a closer view of what the street network may look like and the lot layout. So happy to answer any questions. If a particular slide you'd like me to go back to, I'm happy to do that.
Once again, we want to thank everybody for joining us today, both online, and we also actually had one attendee here in the council chambers. But I also wanted to take a moment to introduce the team. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, some of you may not be here. Of course, Corey Lewis, who was just speaking, is with Kaufman and Associates, who are our primary consultant helping us with the process. They also recently completed the master plan for us. Matt Quick is here also from Kaufman here in the chambers with it, and Judy Krause. is here with Kaufman also. They've been our primary consultant team throughout this process and will continue to do so. Also, Bennett Bratley is here, who's our economic development manager for the city of Kingman, also works very closely with us at the airport and actually has done great work in the industrial park. Lisa Lewis is our administrative coordinator. She's on the Zoom and coordinating all of the efforts there. So if there are any additional questions, you can certainly chat them, or you can raise your hand, or you can send a chat message to Lisa if you'd like to make any comments. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're excited about the process of the environmental assessment, certainly, but also the public outreach, because we really rely on the members of the community to provide us with some perspective that sometimes when we're looking down all the time doing our work, miss some of the big picture. We think we do a good job. I don't want you to get the wrong idea, but we look forward to your comments. So if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer them. Sort of tie all of it together. And they identify that phase 3 was done in 2007, 2008. Could you look and see if you've got a copy of that?
I will.
I know. Well, no, I know. I'm thinking more about historically. You guys have been with the authority and us for I don't know how long. But I mean, I am willing to bet big money that it's there in the building somewhere. And what I did today was actually, I'm working with ADQ on seeking a potential grant balance. They think it's more than their grant accommodates, but they're willing to help us with trying to. So I think that, I'm not sure that I need the phase 3, but I'd like to have it.
I'll look for it.
Yeah, and I want to say, and I don't know if Western
You're unmuted. I'm unmuted.
Hi, Drew, go ahead and ask your question if you like.
Yes, I'm just wondering, like all the new industries that should be coming in, I know it's gonna take a while. Are they gonna get like incentives to build or tax breaks or, and then it'll involve the citizens of Kingman of paying up more taxes?
Joe or Bennett, are you able to answer that question?
Yeah, this is Bennett, and we do not have any incentives like that on the books that we're going to be administering.
There are potentially benefits through the,
Yeah, through the Arizona Commerce Authority at the state level, there are incentives that deal with workforce and deal with tax credits, but nothing really to incentivize them to develop a land or to give them money to develop their project on this land, if that answers your question.
And if they do get, it won't affect the other citizens in any other way? The people that live in town?
Yeah, there's nothing, no tax dollars that are currently being offered for this project to incentivize a company to come and to give, property tax dollars to that project.
and let me also, Bennett, there's a couple other things that clearly protect the airport, the funds. So the airport is an enterprise fund. We're not part of the general fund at all. We do not take any current general fund contributions from the regular City of Kingman General Fund, number one. Number two, the Federal Aviation Administration has what they call the grant assurances. That part of the grant assurances, if you take federal money and grants and things like that, you're obligated to follow these. And one of those is to make sure that the airport's as self-sustaining as possible. And so it's every airport's responsibility to maximize the revenues that they generate to help support the airport. As I mentioned, or as has been mentioned earlier, this land release is done for the benefit of the airport. The sales must stay within the airport to continue to have monies to continue to develop the airport. And so there's another protection. A third item is this land is actually within Mojave County. It's not within the City of Kingman. And so while the City of Kingman is the owner of the land, they're not the jurisdiction. So they don't really have incentives to give, if you will. So, and as I said, as an airport manager, my first responsibility always is to maintain a safe and secure airport. My secondary responsibility is to maintain a good customer environment for the airport users and the customers of the airport. But the third one is always to maximize revenues to the airport. This land is the future of the airport. It provides the capital for us to continue to develop and continue to maintain the airport. And so we want to maximize that revenue, and we certainly don't want to give anything away. I hope that answered your question first and also helped you understand a little bit about how we in the airport business operate, and it's first and foremost on our mind to always be fair, be equitable, but maximize revenues for the airports.
Is the airport gonna be open up in the future for more aircraft coming in?
Yeah, we're a public use airport. We're available to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we're absolutely open for business.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So we'll continue responding and answering the questions in the this format, but also for the people in the council chambers, we have comment forms, and then we're also just we'll receive comments through February 18th. You can email the comments to me here. I'll just leave my email address up for a few minutes. And if you do end up having other questions or comments beyond the 18th, we'll accept those as well. But, as I mentioned, ultimately we'll have a document to review that will document a lot of this, that will include a lot of this information, the analysis, and the public will have the opportunity to comment on that as well.
I was watching the news this morning, Channel 10 out of Phoenix, and the two, and 4 anchors or whatever, but the 2 ladies that are on there, Roman, Celeste, Rodriguez, can't remember them. Anyway, they come on at different times. So when both of them were on, they both were wearing these really nice fuchsia blouses. And it was like, wow, you guys are coordinated. And they tried to get Ron Hoon to go into, because he's broadcasting from home. So we'll go in your closet, find a fuchsia tie. We said, that's really how we'll be coordinated. Oh, I need to call him. He needs to do an IFE for us. We're getting ready to submit on the drainage study, so I'm waiting for the final fee. Good. I'm sorry? Right, yeah. Right. I said better get on his dance card. You know what we ought to investigate? I don't know what the criteria is. Through the, I can't remember whether it's local, it's a state or there's a military reuse zone. It designated as a military reuse zone. And there are incentives for people to develop. There's different tax credits and training credits, employee credits, all that stuff. We had it, the only 2 that I'm immediately aware of are in Goodyear and Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport, both base reuse. And so we ought to investigate that and see what's required. My understanding is that it's a challenging process. In Goodyear, Brian Dalkey, who was the development director at the time, actually got it done while he was before he became city manager. No, he's retired. He became city manager, Brian Dalkey did. After, God, I can't remember the guy's name that left. But anyway, and then about, because while I was still at Glendale, he actually did retire, and I went down to his, a couple of years, 2, 3 years. Anyway, it's something we probably ought to look into. Provide some additional development incentive. That coupled with some ACA. I'll find out more. Military reuse zone, Marcy. And it's for essentially bases that have been reused. Our situation's not very dissimilar than Goodyear, for example. Goodyear, the city of Phoenix bought Phoenix Goodyear Airport
Same traffic running all the way down to the.
Okay, it looks like we have another question. Drew, do you want to ask the question aloud?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, instead of, all the eastbound traffic truckers, instead of running them all the way down to the airport drive out there, why don't they, make an entrance by Gordon? At the beginning of the new division.
Are you speaking about an entrance to the airport?
Right, yeah, to all that new industrial area.
You know, right now, everything is conceptual. In other words, we've got this plan, but we really have no idea how it's gonna develop. This is sort of just a schematic way to, so what I would say is, I think when we would be to the point of, one of the things that'll drive the entrance is where the road comes from, you know, up from the interstate. I don't know that that's been absolutely identified yet either. So I think your suggestion is good, to try to segregate traffic and make certain kinds of traffic go the most logical places. And so whether it's when we're doing our final development or as the city is developing the East Bench area, traffic engineers will look at that and sort of try to figure out the best way to keep that traffic separate. But it's a good suggestion to try to make sense of where the users have the most efficient access. So I appreciate that.
Okay, well, I appreciate, yeah, my wife said that's not a question, but I still want to know. I live out towards the airport, so I'm just thinking more traffic all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, and it will continue as that eastern area continues to develop, certainly. In fact, you know, one hopes that with the new interchanges, with the new roads, with the new development, that while it is going to be more activity, there are also going to be more than just Andy out there and some of the other cross streets, Diagonal and others. So as additional roads develop, that also helps alleviate the concentration of traffic in one general location. But yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, well, thank you.
It was kind of fun out there on 66 the other night in the snow.
How much did you guys have on the ground?
I can tell you what was on the runway, probably at the peak, was between 1.5 inches and 2.5 inches, you know. Probably around 1.5 inches to 2 inches is pretty accurate. But it came, for us, it had been snowing all day, right? But it hadn't been cold. So at 5 o'clock, we really had a cell come through, very productive. I left the airport, everything was wonderful. I get down into town, and as I'm driving into town, it started snowing when I was leaving the airport, but as I'm driving into town, snow, more, heavier. I just turned around and went back. I didn't even finish going to the hotel, so it was interesting.
Hey, Joe.
Yes.
looking at the Zoom, it appears that we have a new somebody that recently joined. So we can kind of rewind and go back through the welcome and I can do the overview again.
Okay, I would agree to that. So welcome. I see we have one new attendee to our participants, and want to thank you for joining us here at our first public outreach meeting for the environmental assessment for our land release process. So, as you know, as I've mentioned before, we're excited about this because well, we want public input, we want to answer questions, we want the community to know what we're doing and what our plans are for the future. Because this land release, just like the previous land release, is really for the benefit of the airport, to continue to provide the capital for the development of the airport into the future. So thank you for joining us today. We do this because we have a duty to inform, but also we're happy to share information with our community, and we look forward to any questions that you might have. So Corey's going to give you kind of an overview of the environmental assessment process to this point and sort of what's to come.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So I'm Corey Lewis with Kaufman Associates. We're the consulting firm that's preparing the environmental assessment for the land release. Our firm also recently completed an airport master plan for Kingman Airport in January 2021. So just some background information on the airport. It was built in 1941. It's a 4,000 acre property to support World War II efforts, and was following the war was transferred to Mojave County to become the community airport. In 1979, 1,100 acres were released through a similar process that the city's undertaking now for industrial development. That 1,100 acres is an industrial park on the west side of the airport that you may see as you drive in to enter off Andy Devine. So that leaves a 2,900 acre airport property, which was transferred to the city of Kingman in 1992. And that's how the ownership stands today. So kind of an overview of what the release is. So the land, all the airport land is currently federally obligated. And FAA outlines a process for releasing land and with a key piece of that process being that the land is not needed for future aviation purposes. And once the land is released, the land can either be sold or leased to a developer, with the caveat that revenues must be used to support the airport. So as I mentioned, the city recently completed a master plan process for the airport. One of the outcomes of that process was that the land needed for future aviation development was identified. So what we're seeing here is the master plan development concept. What is depicted is a lot of hangar development on the west side of the airport, and also some additional apron or ramp space for aircraft storage. Additionally, there's a runway extension to the northeast. So with that, that's the kind of the near term and midterm development at the airport. But then with that, we also have identified approximately 400 acres that could be used for future aviation development. So as I mentioned, one of the key questions for the land release is this land needed for future aviation development? And what we've identified is the balance of this area. It's 1,813 acres that is not needed for future aviation development. And so the recommendation is that it be released. And so the environmental assessment that we're undertaking is just one step in that process. So what we're doing right now is we're early in the environmental assessment process. We're working towards submitting a draft document to the FAA for review. We anticipate having that submitted later in the spring, with the anticipation that we'd have a public review process of that document over the summer and wrap it up later this fall. And once that environmental document is complete, then we would complete we anticipate completing the land release process. So FAA does some additional review, and ultimately there's a Federal Register notice about the project. When we're talking about the land release and the environmental assessment, there's FAA notes that several environmental resource categories need to be considered in the document. Specifically, we'll be looking at biological resources in the area, historical resources, dating back to the World War II era or even potentially prior to that. And then we're really also focusing on hazardous materials, or the potential for hazardous materials to be out in the site. If you're familiar with the history of the airport, post-World War II, much of that land south of the runway system was used to store aircraft that were ultimately dismantled there at the airport. So this focuses in on the 1,813 acre release area. This land, except for the areas within the approaches, would be available for sale or lease. Within the approaches, the land would be only available for lease. That is so that the city can exercise greater land use control over those areas and to protect the approaches to the runway ends. So conceptually, what may happen on the released property is, a larger or a similar version of the industrial park development that has occurred since 1979, when this 1,100 acre property was released. So what we're depicting here is a conceptual road layout and parcels ranging from 4 to 120 acres. And really would just allow the city of Kingman to respond to developer requests for a variety of sizes of parcels. There could be future rail access into the industrial park that connects to the BNSF lines here. For reference, the southern boundary here aligns with Gordon Drive. And so that's approximately how far south of the airport that goes. And again, we've depicted in here areas that are reserved for future aviation development. That's an overview of the land release and concept and the environmental assessment. So as part of the environmental assessment, we'll be taking public comments now in the initial phase. We'll accepting those through February 18th. This is actually kind of a zoom in of some of the lot layouts, but accepting comments through February 18th. If you have additional questions, you can feel free to email me or reach out to the airport, and we can hopefully get your questions answered. So with that, does anybody have any questions?
And thank you, Corey. And just quickly to introduce, of course, you met Corey Lewis, also joining us from Kaufman & Associates, who are assisting us with the process, is Judy Krause and Matt Quick. They're here in the council chambers with me. I'm Joe Husband. I'm the airport interim airport general manager. Also Bennett Bratley, our economic development manager, is here with us, who does a lot of the development for the airport and assists us in a great way. And then Lisa Lewis is our administrative coordinator, and she is coordinating all of our Zoom activity. So I wanted to recognize and thank all of the folks who've on our side of the team who've made this possible. I also want to thank all the folks who've joined us for the process of public comment and questions. We're coming up on our final 15 minutes, so I'm hopeful that we have some additional questions or comments. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. And we did have some interest, we do have a couple of regular flights that come in and out, packages and whatnot. Yeah. So they, I think they just canceled, for those couple of days. But anyway, yeah, I mean, by the time, it quit snowing Tuesday morning and started warming up, we probably could have opened even sooner than that, out of an abundance of caution. By the time we opened, I mean, the runway was wet and even many places was dry.
Yeah.
So it was, completely back to normal. By later in the day, it was as dry as it was. But yeah, we just wait. What else you can do? Well,
Sacramento closing for fog.
it's trying to figure out, it's our responsibility to keep, we would broadcast through NOTAMs the conditions, the runway conditions. But we had no breaking action reports because nobody had landed. And so it's really just us trying to figure it out. And get to a point where I'm like, okay, could an airplane potentially land and do it safely? Maybe, but why take the chance? And people in that kind of weather, they don't have an absolute need to fly, they shouldn't be flying anyway. I mean, I'm not trying to tell pilots what to do, of course, but I think most would agree in inclement weather, it's better to stay on the ground.
Chances are you were probably below it.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I had the lights on most of the day, just because it was pretty much, meteorology, IMF, IMC.
How would we handle that big dust? For eyewitness?
Yeah.
That's probably way more common.
Yeah,
They come quick, it depends on how long they're there before you issue a note of it and take it back.
Right.
again.
yeah, because in most cases, those are gonna pass within, 15 to 20 minutes, and that's even a long one.
Yeah.
So, I think in those cases, you do the best you can, if you think there's the ability to get those out. Another thing that you can do is monitor the common traffic advisory frequency, see if there's any aircraft in the area. Provide advisories that way, through the radio. But, yeah, those are tough, because they, like you said, they come on fast, they go fairly fast.
Gas tank pumps?
Yeah, yeah.
See none of it. And, there was
We
some
always heard stories of those before we moved out, about years ago. Only been one. It was really like, wow. One day when we were in our office, but on the other side of the hallway, I could see it coming down mountain. It's this wall.
finally these things have it now.
Did you guys, either one of you ever go to the McDowell Mountain Music Festival? It used to be at Westworld, they had it out there on the polo field.
No, I haven't.
Great festival, then it moved from Westworld to, I think like a bar or something that had a big parking lot, and they did it there, I never went to it there. Those were great, they got in some great acts. One of my favorite bands to go see is Los Lobos, just because they're nothing fancy, there's no flash, none of that, those guys are just awesome. Dave Hidalgo playing that guitar, oh my God. Anyway, but they would get great acts in there, and it's just fun, because I like being out on grass. Sure. And that kind of stuff.
No, I never have.
It was fun. That's nothing to do with airports, but,
I got a message.
your son Phoenix.
Yeah, like we want. Yes, they only call once. That's what I've just come to realize that since he's gone down
Bennett's-
there his first year.
Bennett's oldest is away at college.
He goes, well, so I'm going skydiving. And he's asking, it costs this much, but I get video of me in different.
Where's he going, Eloy or Coolidge?
He's going out of Coolidge.
Coolidge, yeah. just not built for that here, which is okay. But I was just checking with Jim about what they charge for aircraft storage, checking with a lot of the airports around that do that. There's not a ton of us. Here, there's Pinal and a little bit Marana and us, Goodyear, and then of course there's Roswell and Mojave. So we're just kind of evaluating what I've seen so far is we're maybe a little below the market, not terrible. I think it's pretty common to see 300s, although I've seen less than that. We're at about 260, I think. So, in the hood.
How many do you have right now?
A lot, maybe more. I don't know exactly. I mean, we just did the inventory today and I sent it in, but I didn't look at how many there are, you know. A few hundred. Yeah.
I think Jim said that this time a year ago, they only had about 90. Now they have.
Holy smokes. I'll tell you, at Goodyear, you know, at one time, they had that whole area full, all the way from the road to the end of the runway. It got down to the point, I think there were like, less than 20 airplanes stored out there. That's while I was there at Goodyear. And then it started building back up again, and now they're pretty high. But I mean, it got to a point there for a while when I was like, wow. But I think they had a number of Maxes there before they started returning service and others.
I think I read that American just started flying the MAX out of Sky Harbor last week.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be on one, probably. I fly a fair amount with American, a little bit with Delta. Figure I'll be on one. We're going to Dallas in May and Reno in June. Both of those are on there.
Stay in the Dallas area or is there something?
Yeah, my sister lives south of Fort Worth, in a town called Burleson.
I know. I lived down in the Dallas area for about 5 years.
Yeah, she works in Tarrant County for the Tarrant
Hey, Joe, we're
Yes.
nearing the end of our meeting time, so I just wanted to offer up to the online participants or anybody in person if any last questions. And if not, you know, in person, there are comment sheets. People have comments they'd like to submit, or you can contact me with the email address or phone number on the screen.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Like I said, those that have participated, we thank you. And you know, we are your Kingman Airport, so feel free to come out and visit us if you have questions. Can you hear me, Corey?
I can, yep.
I project. Anyway, but yeah, to the folks that are there, still there, feel free to come out to the airport. Call us anytime. We're mostly there. Anyway, I do appreciate that. We got a couple more minutes on the official clock here in the City Council chamber, so if I don't say it later, I'll say thank you for joining us, and it's been a pleasure. We'll do this again throughout the process, so look for these public meetings coming up in the future. Corey Lewis, 816.
Our office has been on the very side traditionally.
Oh, really? Yeah. Actually, my kin folks are in, it's kind of the suburb, in Missouri. Trying to remember. Lee Summit, yeah, Lee Summit. That's where my niece lives and her family, and Michael, my nephew, and his family, they have a farm out somewhere. You know, I don't know how far out of town it is or where exactly it is, but they enjoy living out in the country a little bit. Yeah.
For about 2 hours more. Mom and my brother got a lot of family.
Yeah. Oh, don't thank him too much. I'm sure there'll be an invoice. Yeah.
It's all part of the fixed contract.
Oh, good. You love that part.
So we need a,
Oh, well, in that case,
Nothing additional, Joe.
yeah, come on.
you know what, in that case, can you guys just hang out here for another couple hours?
Yeah, a couple of days, yeah. So we're showing 5:30 on our City Council Chambers official clock, so I just want to thank you all once again for joining us and look forward to your participation in the future. Have a pleasant and wonderful day. Signing off.